We are getting ready to begin, so if everybody has their favorite seat, that's what we want you to do. Obviously, you can sit anywhere you'd like to, and if I hope everybody can hear me. If not, holler and I'll speak up or move closer to this microphone. Today we take the time to remember all those shipmates of the USS Midway who served so honorably for her 47 years by dedicating a commemorative plaque in their honor. This is a replica of the plaque that we have that we hope to have set up at on the USS Midway Museum in San Diego. The picture you see behind me is a much larger version of the plaque and what it looks like. At the end of this ceremony, we will all go out to the plaque wall and you can see where the Midway plaque is now mounted there to join the other 500 plaques that are there. Your host for today is Paul Haley, Director of Planned Giving for the U.S. Navy Memorial Foundation. Paul?
Quite a while ago, and the reason for the plaque wall was that if you look on the arms of the chairs that you're sitting in, everybody had a chance to put their name, whether it be a ship or whether a person's name or whatever, on the chairs. But I quickly ran out of 240 seats, and that was the birth of the plaque wall, which your plaque is on now. And I'm remembering back my association with Admiral Zumwalt and Admiral Tom Mora. At the very beginning, when they were trying to conceptualize what the Navy Memorial was going to be all about, those two gentlemen who had served long enough to know the reason for giving an opportunity for shipmates to get together, they said, Paul, we want a place that can commemorate but also celebrate. And for those of you that have been active in ship reunions, you know what that's all about. There's an endless stream of stories which are wonderful, and I know we're going to hear a few of those today. So the plaque is going to bind you, so to speak, to the Navy Memorial, and that you can see it online. You can direct folks to come in and head for panel 34 and see what it looks like. The other link is our Navy log. Now, I know that some of you maybe got a little bit of orientation today with Dan in the log room, but it's an opportunity to put your service time, a picture, some service memories in the Navy log, which is going to be there, hopefully, forever. Okay. And just a quick story. I have a nephew that's...
Plaque dedication, gathering of shipmates, family, and friends. Bless all those former sailors that died while proudly serving their country, as well as those called home once they returned to civilian life. Bless all our sea service personnel currently serving in harm's way. And bless and inspire the current generation to consider a career in the Navy, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard. Amen.
Event for all of us who served on the USS Midway and recognizing her 40 years of service to our country. Our purpose here today is to dedicate a plaque to our fine ship and the over 225,000 young men, and yes, we were young men back in the day. Midway never had any young ladies aboard to my knowledge, so yes, we were all young men, who served aboard her between 1945 and 1992. In a very few minutes, the USS Midway will join the honor roll of over 500 other ships, squadrons, and individuals on the Navy Memorial commemorative plaque wall. This wall and our place on it is now a permanent reminder of Midway's long service to our Navy and recognition for all who served aboard her and created Midway magic. First of all, I'd like to get some highlights about Midway's career, and I will tell you it is hard to pick out things because there are so many things that Midway was involved in. When you leave, at the back of the room, there is a 4-page document with all the statistics about what she did, when she did it, how much she weighed, all kinds of things. If you're interested in that, you can find that here, or you can also find it on the Midway Museum website. But we have that handout back in the back if you'd like to take one of those. Midway's keel was laid in 1943. She was completed in only 17 months, now get ready for this, at a cost of $85.6 million. I think today's high-performance aircraft cost more than that, but first of all, completing a ship like that in 17 months was unbelievable, and the cost, of course, in 1945 dollars was quite expensive, but nowhere near what we're thinking about today. And she was commissioned just 1 week after the end of World War II, so she did not serve in that conflict. At the time she was commissioned, she was the largest warship in the world. Our ship was the lead vessel of 3 Midway class aircraft carriers. The other 2 are the Coral Sea and the Franklin D. Roosevelt. These ships were the first American carriers to have armored flight decks. Previous carriers all had wood flight decks, so it was quite an innovation to have armored flight decks with the Midway and her sisters. For the first 10 years of her life, Midway served in the Atlantic Fleet, where she did 7 deployments. In 1955, she did an around-the-world cruise to join the Pacific Fleet and immediately went in for a 4-year modernization overhaul. At that time, Midway was built as a straight deck carrier. The angle deck was put on at that time, and her bow was enclosed, and obviously a lot of other changes were made over a 4-year period of time. But when you look at the basic ship as she was built and the changes that were made, this was a very significant overhaul. When she was recommissioned, her home port was Alameda, California, for the next 10 years, where she did regular deployments to the 7th Fleet in the Far East. Her first combat deployment was in 1965. In 1966, Midway underwent yet another modernization overhaul. This one lasted 4 years and allowed her to operate high-performance jet aircraft. Midway was the first aircraft carrier forward deployed, which means that her home port was changed to Yokosuka, Japan, and I believe that was in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know the date on that, but that's where she spent the last part of her career.
Like 1973.
I'm sorry?
73.
Was it 73? Okay, there we go, 1973. Sounds like we have some with experience here. Thank you. And again, dive in if you have something you'd like to say. As I said, we're very flexible here today. In 1975, Midway participated in something called Operation Frequent Wind, where she rescued 3,073 refugees at the end of the Vietnam War. Turns out that when we had our last MVA reunion in San Diego in April, the Midway was commemorating Operation Frequent Wind just as we were ending up. And it was a very significant and solemn time for those that were involved. And the Midway can be proud of the work she did during that period of time. In 1990 and 1991, Midway participated in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, launching 3,339 combat sorties with no loss of aircraft. This was the most sorties of any U.S. carrier, so the smallest aircraft carrier outperformed all the super carriers, and that's part of the Midway magic. Thank you. On her way home to be decommissioned, one of her final assignments was something called Operation Fiery Vigil, when she took 1,823 evacuees aboard from Clark Air Force Base when Mount Pinatubo erupted in 1991. So again, she was a warship, but she had many other duties that she performed in relief and help of others. Midway was decommissioned on 11 April 1992 in San Diego, California. After 11 years in the Reserve Fleet, the Navy donated CB-41 to the San Diego Aircraft Carrier Museum Foundation. On 10 June 2004, she assumed her new duties as the Midway Museum, America's living symbol of freedom, where she hosts over 1 million visitors a year. She is the most visited aircraft carrier museum. She is the #1 attraction in San Diego, for some more of those gee whiz figures. We are so very lucky to have her in this role so we can go back to San Diego and walk her decks and relive our time on board. And now a commercial message. This is from the USS Midway Veterans Association. I am a vice president of the USS Midway Veterans Association. I plan reunions for the group. That's my function. MVA has over 300 members, and we are growing every year as we find more Midway shipmates all over the country. And what we find is when we find a new member, he knows 2 or 3 other people, and we just keep growing. And that's what these reunions are all about, is for us to gather as a group and share the time we spent aboard the USS Midway. The roots of today's organization started in the mid-1990s when a retired operations specialist chief used a new tool called the internet to find people who had served in the OI division. And that's how we started. Our first reunions probably had 20 to 30 people who attended, and that was a lot of people for the group that we were working with. In 2010, we decided to expand to a ship-wide organization, and we have grown from there. In 2013, we had over 300 attendees in San Diego, with the highlight of that reunion being a dinner on the flight deck. And I gotta tell you, there's nothing better than sitting on the flight deck of the USS Midway as the sun is going down, enjoying a nice meal and the comradeship of your shipmates. In 2015, we went back to San Diego with almost 350 guests, and the highlight of that trip was the visit to the USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Here's my thought. Much bigger? Yes, but better? I don't think so. Our next reunion is in late April of 2016 in Pensacola, Florida, where the highlight will be a visit to the Naval Aviation Museum and the weekly Blue Angels practice sessions. So if you'd like to join us there, we'd love to have you, and I will provide any information to anybody that would like to come along. You do not have to be a member of the Midway Veterans Association to attend our reunions, but obviously we'd like you to do that, and if you are, you get our newsletter and our information about things that are going on with us. In 2017, planning way ahead, it is back to San Diego. We go there every other year. That's in our bylaws. And obviously the attraction for us is the ship that's there, and our reunions in San Diego are always much larger than our East Coast reunions. So we'll be back in 2017, and guess what? We're going to do dinner on the flight deck again. So if you'd like to enjoy that experience, circle that. We'll probably be in the fall. We haven't picked a date yet, but it'll probably be in the fall. Let me assure you that it is always a pleasure to go aboard the Midway again, no matter how long when you left her or when you were there last. Every time you go back, there's something new and different. MVA is a 501c19 organization. In the last 5 years, we have donated over $20,000 to the Midway Museum's Education Fund, the Ship's Preservation Fund, and the Battle of Midway Experience Theater that opened on the ship in 2015. So yes, we have a good time, but we also support the Midway. We think that by doing that, she'll live on for forever and ever, and that's one of our missions. These donations come from a 20% set aside of our members' annual dues. We do raffles and auctions at our reunions, so yeah, we take your money, but you get some nice prizes as well. And let's see, and individual member donations. So obviously we take donations at any time, and that supports the organization. And it is a time when families reestablish bonds, when memories become keepsakes, and stories becomes realities. The plaque we are dedicating here today is symbolic of everything we did as sailors aboard. Everything we do today honors her legacy, and all that will happen to keep her memory alive in the hearts of each of our members and our great nation. Periodically, our Midway veterans get together to share our lives and times with our shipmates and friends. We call that our extended family. These are the times that we bond with our brethren and create family units we now know as the USS Midway Veterans Association. This bond is stronger than life itself, and even though the veterans will disappear, the family spirit will endure with history. The ship is a memory for all of us and a keepsake for many. The stories we tell about the lives and times spent as young men working on the decks of this great ship are the realities, the magic that we helped create, and that became the legend that is being honored here today. Quoting Marjorie Holmes, an American author, "At Christmas, all roads lead home. We have followed this road to this place for this commemoration. What better gift for a gallant lady than to honor her memory, her legacy, and create yet another place in history for her stories to be told." God bless the USS Midway veterans, every service veteran, and the men and women serving in our armed forces today. I am honored to be among them. Thank you on behalf of the USS Midway Veterans Association, and it's signed by Oscar Granger, our president. Now, we have a moment here, and I would like to give everybody the opportunity to stand and say their name, say what you did aboard the Midway and the years that you served aboard, and if you want to throw in a little sea story, you can do that. My story, and it will be short, is the first time I ever saw the USS Midway. I was straight out of RDA school, Radarman A school, I should say, at Hunters Point. So here I am at the San Francisco Naval Shipyard at Hunters Point, sea bag over my shoulder, walking up and looking at this colossal ship that was sitting there in front of me. And of course, the closer I got, the bigger she got. And then I arrived right beside her, and there she was in a dry dock. So I got to see not only the top part of the USS Midway, which all of us saw, but I got to see the 36 feet that were below the water line as well on that particular day. And to wrap up my story, 2 days after I reported aboard, I was told to report to a bosun mate and be in the line handling party to take the ship out of the dry dock. I had no clue what I was doing, but I can assure you on that date I got a whole new respect for the term bosun mate and the colorful language that they use. So, okay.
First, I have to tell you that in the old Navy, we had right arm ranks and left arm ranks. So you might not be aware of that. And the gunner's mates, bosun, coxswain, fire control were right arm rigs. It was 1945 when the fleet pulled into New York Harbor in the Hudson River. We were tied up to buoys, and of course I didn't get ashore because I lived from New York originally. And so I was watching the movie on the hangar deck when suddenly they announced Special Sea Detail. And everyone was running every which way. I didn't have a duty station on Special Sea Detail, so I was a little confused. I thought, this is something serious. Suddenly a senior officer ran up to me and said, "Get in that boat." "Aye, aye, sir." So I went over the side and got in his boat. It was a Higgins boat. And I had my half-hour sea training in Rhode Island on a whale boat. And this thing had 2 handles, 2 screws, and you steer it. It had no rudder. You steer it by revving one engine or the other. There was an ensign on board. I said, "I can't handle this." He said, "Get it out, move out." So he said, "Take it back to the fantail." And as I was moving, the Hudson River was moving out. And I took it out, swung it around, trying to get the feel of it. And if you ever looked at the fantail of this ship, it comes down, it's rounded. It seemed that the battleship in front of us had slipped a mooring and I was supposed to pick up a new cable at the fantail. So I came around, and the tide carried me out quite a ways. I was trying to maneuver in. I had to rev it up to move it against the tide. I pulled into the side of the ship and rammed it right into underneath that fantail. That knocked the whole railing in. I took it out again, made another big pass around, took it around and knocked the air scoops off. All the while, nobody said anything. The ensign didn't say a word. So, the third time, we managed to get it around, and the other sailors grabbed the lines, and we let down a steel cable. We took it over to the battleship. I had no trouble there because the battleship was straight down. And this Higgins boat was a wreck now. And this was about 10 o'clock at night when we started. I know it was dawn when we pulled up. And nobody said anything. I didn't know that ensign, and I didn't know the rest of the people in that boat. So I just got off and went to my bunk. And that's the story.
Midway between 1979 and 1982. I was a surface line officer, did watches on the bridge, main control, CIC. And I was on the Midway during the entire period of the Iran hostage crisis. We were actually the first carrier to get up in the area. We were off of Mombasa when the crisis started. And then I was up there in the Indian Ocean and we had to wait until 2 other carriers got there before we could leave there. And when I heard President Carter make his statement that Iran would suffer grave consequences if any of the hostages were harmed, I sort of wondered where those grave consequences might have come from. But as I said, I might have said, I was on the ship for about 3.5 years, and when I went to a Midway reunion with Jim here, a couple of reunions, I found people who had even been on there longer than that, and I couldn't believe that. But that's my story. Thanks.
Shortly thereafter, the plank owner, he was one of the first guys there. I might have been one of the last guys. I was on the Marine Detachment from 87 to 89. So we were in charge of making sure that the sailors, the ordies, had access to the bombs with a really big boom, had to go there and observe the 2-man roll. And we used to run around with shotguns and flak jackets and, yell gangway and make a lot of enemies on the mess deck. So the interesting thing, I got to go on the cruise where it was the first cruise that they pushed the Phantoms off and brought the Hornets on, put the blisters on the side, and our planes flew air support for the Operation Ernest Will tanker escort operation in late 87, early 88. So I made that cruise, and I got off in August of 89. Some of the fun times I remember is taking one of our red float coats and going up and dancing across the foul lines, watching them shoot the jets. We got to go do elevator rappelling down I got the XO of the ship to go rappel 6 decks down one of the weapons elevators. And I got to go meet the CO on the bridge, because I had one of my buddies was the CO's orderly, one of the Marines. So I got to meet Captain, now retired Admiral Rich Wilson. And then we got to go actually do some helicopter rappelling out on the flight deck. So one of the few people that got a carrier landing on the USS Midway and a pair of black leather boots. It's an honor to be in your presence. I want to welcome all the other veterans from the different times.
Of 87 to the summer of 89. I probably participated in your Marine Corps ball there in Cuby Point, if you remember that. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. It's a long story, but then I ended up in the Navy after I went back to school, and I became an intelligence officer. I couldn't be an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps, but the Navy allowed me. But my most memorable time on board Midway, this is the Christmas season. The Christmas of 87 was my first time away from my wife and my 2 children, and my kids were 5 and 2 at the time. We got to Midway, I got on board Midway, and we were supposed to be in dry dock to fix those blisters, those infamous blisters. And then Ernest Will kicked over, and Ronald, then we were told to pack up and head to the IO to support the reflag Kuwaiti tankers in Operation Ernest Will. We got out there to the North Arabian Sea on Christmas Eve, and we were visited by Bob Hope. And luckily for me, the XO, Ev Shipe, Captain Shipe appointed me to be Barbara Eden's escort officer. If you ever remember seeing that show back when it made television back stateside, I think it was in the spring of '88, Barbara Eden was in a gold lame dress that was very form-fitting, and she had a tough time with the zipper going up the back. And I was off stage with her, standing beside her, and she asked me to pull up the last 3 or 4 inches of her dress before she went on stage. And of course, off here, stage, I guess stage left, if I'm doing it right, half the ship's company saw me. And boy, was I in trouble. 7 days later, we crossed the equator. And I was also, in addition to being CVIC, I was also the senior WOG. And I paid for that, and I can tell you a lot of stories about what happened to me on the flight deck during the crossing the line ceremony. But it was a good time, very memorable for the family, and hopefully someday I will be able to go back to San Diego, my wife's hometown, and visit my old ship. Thank you. Merry Christmas, everybody.
My name is Tom Hilt. I was with VF 151, the Vigilantes, and made the 1971 and 1972-73 cruises. I was a squadron intel officer, so for intel people, that's good to see at least one other here. The only thing I can remember is we talk about some of the Midway accomplishments. People may not remember, but in 1972 when we deployed, we actually deployed a month early in April because of the North Vietnamese coming across the DMZ. And the Midway had 1 day of Carrick walls before they stopped it and tried to determine whether we were going to go straight to Subic Bay to join the carriers in the Gulf, or would they give us a weekend to go into go back to Alameda and let people like my squadron, who most of the bachelors had not gotten out of their apartments and done anything with their personal goods. So Admiral Zumwalt actually came aboard and said, well, we'll let you guys go back to San Diego for the weekend. And the Midway deployed Monday morning, they say a month early, for what was to be a 7-month cruise, turned out to be an 11-month cruise. And actually some of the other notable statistics, I think we did 191 days of combat operations during that cruise, which I believe was the record for a single cruise by a carrier in Vietnam. Anyway, it was a good time. So thank you for coming.
One story that I kind of like to tell, I claim the shortest successful A4D landing because one time the boiler plate on the arresting gear engine had fallen off and had shorted 2 wires. I was in the groove with an 11,000-pound airplane, and the arresting gear engine at that time was passing 53 or 54,000 pounds. So I went boom like that. The first thing I said, oh heck, I forgot my shoulder harness again. And the airplane I had purchased that aircraft myself just a couple weeks before that, and it was fine. They put it through test, and so I claim the shortest successful A4 landing on the Midway. And at this time, I'd like to also just say a little bit about, I lost 2 roommates that were killed later in the war. And one fellow that was my designated wingman, Larry Cooper, who nobody ever hears about him, but he was a fellow that was shot down in a terrible incident by a Terrier missile off of San Diego in very early '65, I believe it was. So a little bit of honor to some of the people that we've lost off the Midway. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Talked about a little bit ago. In 1954, 55, I was with VF-12 at that time, and I was with that squadron from late 53 to 56. It was quite an experience. I was a flight deck troubleshooter. I was an aviation electrician, and had many an interesting flight deck experience. I'll just mention one, which I usually do when I get into the company of Midway veterans, because of the two fellows I'm going to mention, I probably wouldn't be here. And I usually hope that I'll run into someone who might know who they were, because at the time, and I'm sure you all know, carrier operations are carrier operations. Something happens, you clear it up and you move on, and you continue to operate. But in any event, this event took place while we were responding to one of the typical emergencies of back then and even today, where the Tay-Chin Islands were being, let's say, manhandled by the Chinese, and the Midway, along with 3 other carriers and a fleet, went up there to do something about it under orders from General Eisenhower. In the course of that operation, we had a plane returning with hung rockets. And the aircraft at that time, our squadron had a Banshee. When the plane took the landing gear down and landed, that rocket came off and came down the flight deck. We had planes forward. It was single deck at that time, and there was no place for that rocket to go but into the parked aircraft. I saw it come right by me. I saw the fins come off it, and planted myself on the flight deck waiting for the explosion. It hit a tire and ricocheted around and went up into the tailpipe of a Cougar that had just shut down. The pilot was climbing out of it, fuel all over the place. They were refueling. 2 ordnance men, which is the basis of my story, is what I'm bringing up, came from the portside catwalk, ran over and grabbed that rocket, which was now wedged in that big tailpipe of a Cougar. They took it, heaved it over the side. And I know I was laying on that flight deck just waiting for the fireball to come on down. Why it didn't go up, I don't know, but I think if it had cooked a little longer, that was a hot tailpipe, we'd have been a lot of us wouldn't be here today. So if you ever run into someone from that time, there's 2 fellows that should have been decorated, but it was Navy, it was Midway business. Clear the flight deck, move on, continue operation. Thank you, that's my story.
But unlike all the intel officers here, I was the only cryptologic officer on board, and I got the opportunity to serve both the staffs and the ship. So I was ship's company, but every time a staff came aboard, I was immediately act doutre to the staffs and worked with the flag officers there.
Thank you.
That was the best move I ever made, was when we went to Japan and we were going aboard Midway. It was August, and I think that was the month, it was like a week, the same week we arrived there to report aboard Midway. In the Korean DMZ, they were chopping down a tree to improve visibility or something, and that caused the DMZ incident, the tree chopping incident. So naturally, Midway gets underway like the next day or something. And I got underway. The wife stayed there. When we came back a month later, everything was there. Best move I ever made. It was all done. Had a good opportunity. Also served about 10 years later as a group staff aboard Midway. And yeah, that Bob Hope show, I was there, Jeff.
Yeah, Bob Hope wore your fruit salad.
He actually wore my fruit salad. We were sitting around and he was looking for some and said, oh, that looks okay. And he took that. So yeah, that was good times. And we got a nice port call in Mombasa. That was great. Okay.
My name is Bob Duncan. I was on the Midway from 83 to 85. I was part of the Cargo 5 staff, so we were home ported in QB. Came up, caught the ship a lot of times, but it was a great tour.
Go right back over here. Red sweater? There you go.
McCormick, I was VA 56 Ordnance. Started out as the second class, wound up as first class. But I was on Midway from November of '74 to December of '77. So I remember when we left in a hurry. All our airplanes were in Atsugi, and we were, of course, in port. And it's like, okay, load everything up. We're going to war. Left in a hurry. I was also on board during Operation Frequent Wind. At that time, I was TAD to ship safety. My responsibility was the flight deck, hangar bay, and the magazines. When the gentleman mentioned about rappelling down 6 decks through the magazines, I could just see that, looking down through there. But anyway, one of my favorite or most memorable moments was when, during Frequent Wind, when the Vietnamese major landed the O-1 Bird Dog observation plane with no brakes or tail hook on the flight deck of the Midway. And being ship safety, I was, my responsibility was flight deck. I was one of several people who actually stopped the airplane and helped the major out of the airplane along with his wife and kids. So,
See the plane in Pensacola?
yes, I have been to the museum too. Thank
He
you.
said he wants to come to Pensacola so he could see that plane, as a matter of fact.
Here, Prowlers and A6, I believe. We were sort of reminiscing about, we're hearing the stories when things were, all we remember is the fun stuff, right? That's what we did, a lot of that. And one story I do recall, which is kind of odd that I remember, is one emergency I had in our airplane in all the years I flew in it was a landing gear that wouldn't come down, going downwind on the Midway to land out at Blue Water Ops. And I was with Dana McKinney. If anybody knows him, he was an admiral. He was the only Prowler tail hooker of the year, I think, because he stopped the Prowler on the deck after the catapult broke, right? It was going not fast enough to fly, and he jumped on the brake. He had enough wherewithal to turn the brakes and jump on him and save the airplane, basically. Everybody else punched out. And I was in the airplane with him when I had the one emergency I had in my whole career, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. Sure enough, Dana McKinney had the gear down, which didn't come down right away, slapping the plane around. Next thing I know, we landed and everything was fine. So a lot of fun on the Midway. We went all over the world, basically, as you guys know. So Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Kenya, you name it. So there we were. Anyway, that's our story. We remember all the good times.
Yeah, I'm Jim Feldkamp. I was on 136 with these knuckleheads too. But one quick story, as you mentioned, during Desert Storm, we flew more sorties than any other carrier. One thing you didn't mention, a lot of people didn't know, we flew so much that we flew the flight deck, the non-skid off it. We had to stop flight operations for a couple of days while they flew a new non-skid to repair the ship so we could continue flying. So we out, and there was a great message traffic going on about how the captain of the Roosevelt was talking about how great the max bombing drops he did in one day, or the Air Wing did one day, and our captain went back and said, congratulations, you're rapidly approaching Midway's average during Desert Storm. So our captain got a little trouble for that, Swarovski, I understand, but it was a good story. So.
Arnie Selnick, another gauntlet with these guys, 1992, so we're there for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then shut it down, the QB final party. And if you ever want a good book about Desert Storm, read Iron Claw. It's all about the Prowlers. And I'm in a chapter.
Yeah, and I'm in the chapter.
And I'm in a chapter.
Hi, I'm Mark Luoma. I was a lieutenant commander on the Midway, and I was the Air Wing intelligence officer for CAG 5. So I had to put up with these knuckleheads left of me here. I was on Midway from 1990 to 91, then cross-decked over to Independence and stayed out there for a 3-year tour, which is sort of unusual, but I was trying to get to Naval War College, and so that's what I had to do it. Of course, I love Japan. So I was thinking about stories to tell, and if people remember, you know, you couldn't drink on the ships, and then they gave us beer days, right? So every 45 days you can have a couple of beers, and you had to have your beer chits and all that. Well, during Desert Storm, we missed a couple of beer days, and I think we finally had one while we were anchored there off Bahrain and trying to figure out whether they were going to send us home or not. And then when they made the decision to let us go, we were heading back to Japan, and south of Singapore, they decided to do the crossing the line ceremony, or Wog Day as we called it. And so we dipped down below the equator, did Wog Day, and then did a beer day right after Wog Day. So it was really, you guys remember that?
Yeah.
No. All right, well, the rest of the story is,
Therapy will get rid of that.
that morning I was sitting in the staff meeting, and the skipper and XO were there, the Admiral and the CAG, and the XO says, you know, we got a problem. I said, what's that? Well, we're going to do beer day today, but we got too much beer. And we can't take it back to Japan. The Japanese won't let us bring it back in. Well, how many cans of beer are there? 18,000. And so he looked over to the XO and said, what do you think, XO? He said, drink it all. And that was Midway. But and we had a saying there, it was the right way, the wrong way, the Navy way, and the Midway.
Yeah, good memories, bad memories. One little story. During Desert Storm, my pilot sees this French frigate, and he speaks French, and he insists on writing a note, and he's trying to call him on the radio over and over because he wants to, me to deliver this note to the CO of this French warship, and they won't answer their call sign. So we fly around, recycle the landing gear, which is NATO code for we want to talk to you, and they come up kind of irritated. I go, what do you want? So we say we'd like to land on you. We can land. The pilot's get a call. Well, they can't do that because they got a foul deck, so we'll get lowered down. So of course I'm going to impress these frogs, right? So I've got harness, MP5, knife. I mean, I'm loaded for bear. I'd never jump in the water, this stuff. I come down. My pilot gives me this note, and then I run into the hangar bay and I salute the captain, and he's a big guy, bigger than me. He takes this note. He does this, and he does this, and he does that. He looks at me, signing it sideways. He passes it around to the other several officers in the hangar bay, and they're all snickering. So I'm thinking, what the heck did my pilot write? And he finally comes back to the CO, and he puts his arm around me, and he kind of, this looks like a good French, but I think you should know that this is an Italian warship. Like, oh my God. So I went from mighty Navy rescue swimmer to idiot of the year. And so, of course, we get back to the helicopter. I look for the flag, and sure is everything out there. It's a Italian flag, all right. So my pilot's like, well, what do you think? What do you think of the note? Of course, I'm beyond speak because I'm thinking that could have been an Iraqi boat, and I'm a prisoner of war, So I'm beyond coherent speech. Might have been some four-letter epithets coming out of me. And I said, did you bother looking at the blank flag? He goes, flag? And, the quote of the war, he comes back around and goes, gee, that's not a French flag. Lastly, firing vigil. Up there it says CVB, CVA, CV41. For a short time in history, we're LPH41. As we went to firing vigil, just HS-12 was on board. We stopped or slowed down off Okinawa, brought on 2 H-53 Squadron Marines and a 46 Squadron. So we had a whole bunch of helicopters on the flight deck, looked just like an LPH. It was kind of cool. So anyway, thanks.
For those of you that have not logged in, take a look at those sample logs that are in my handout. And there is a form if you want to send it in or if you simply want to go online. But these are the kinds of stories that next generations are going to look up, somebody that is in the log, someone in your family, whatever. And it's an ability for you to share those stories.
On my list is the pilot who shot down that first MiG in, I don't remember what the year, 65, I don't know what the year was. But in November, Captain Ronald E. McEwen, also known as Muggs, passed away. He has the distinction of the first kill, and he has 2 kills on that particular day. Peter Dunn, BT-3 from 74 to 78, passed away in August of this year. Craig Harper, passed away in March of 2005. He was aboard from 1975 to 1977 as an operations specialist. Craig was the webmaster for the Midway Veterans Association, so he is truly missed by us. Robert Butler, plank owner, was a radarman, and we lost him a few years ago. Another plank owner, William Barrett, was an RT3. That's a radio technician. I'd never heard of that rate, but that's what Robert was. Ron McPhail. Ron was an operations specialist chief. He is the gentleman that I talked about who got on the internet and started trying to find all his own shipmates. So he is, in fact, the founder of the Midway Veterans Association. Sherman Stark, also a plank owner, was an AE2. Charles Seacamp, aboard in 1958, was an RD1. Bobby Coker, aboard from 1960 to 1964, was an RD3. James Burns, Operations Specialist Chief, aboard from 1960 to 1967. Jim Kelly, aboard in 1949, was a boiler mate technician. And the last one on my list is Mark Cruikshank, an ABF-2 in V4 from 1980 to 1988. If anybody would like to stand and recognize a friend, please do so at this time.